there everyone, how are you all doing? This is Laszlo for those of you who don't know me, and I hope you're all doing well. Well, it's been a long time since I last did a cookery programme, and I thought it'd be nice to do that again, particularly now having been to university and lived abroad for a year. Thought I could bring some different knowledge to things from my experiences. So what am I going to do with you today? I'm going to do something very English and something you probably don't make at home much, so I want you to revive it now. And this is an English custard sauce. Now, we often, as I said earlier, don't make this. We usually buy it, and I don't think it's known much in the European countries or eaten as much as us, because we like to pour it on all of our puddings, of course. And essentially what it is, it's a sauce, a dairy sauce made with milk or cream and then thickened with eggs. Now, the modern versions that we buy today often aren't made with eggs, so they're not really quite the real ones, if you see what I mean. And the other things, when we do make it, we often use something here called custard powder. And this has no eggs in it at all. It was actually invented for someone who was intolerant to eggs. And if I open it up, and you can look inside, it just essentially looks like a powder. Well, it is a powder. And this is basically just corn flour with some colouring to make it yellow and some flavouring. And whilst it's very nice, it's not the proper custard. Always good as a standby though, hence why I've got some in your cupboard, just if you want to make something quick. Okay, so enough with that one. Now if we're going back onto the proper egg custards now. Now essentially there are three types. There's the custard sauce, which is what I'm going to be making with you today. And that we call a crème anglaise, if you want to use the French term. Then we have a crème pâtissière, which is a thicker version, and this is almost spreadable, and you use this often in those lovely little pastries that you get, especially in French shops and stuff, or inside custard donuts and stuff. And then the other one, of course, is a baked custard, which you might use in a crème caramel, which has caramel layer on top, and that is done in the oven. But I'm going to focus on the sauce. Now, traditionally, the sauce was probably about the thickness of single cream, so you could test that on the back of the spoon. If you put your finger through, you'd see a line left behind. I think we've got used to having a thicker custard now, especially me. I don't know why, maybe it's just a family thing. So I like somewhere in between a crème anglaise and a crème pâtissière. So to thicken that, I think we should have a little look at the thickening agents and understand things. So the first thing that thickens the sauce is the eggs. So we have egg whites and egg yolks in here. They will both thicken the sauce. However, I find it's much better to use the egg yolks, because when you heat them, you need to get them to a certain temperature without going over a certain temperature that causes them to curdle. And usually we're looking between 70 and 80 degrees Celsius, so we don't let it boil. But if you're like me, you don't have a thermometer and you just do it by eye, which is absolutely fine. Egg whites I find a lot more temperamental, and they tend to give more of a jelly consistency as opposed to a smooth silky consistency of egg yolks, and that can lead to sometimes a bit of a grainy texture, especially as they're a bit more temperamental, as I said, and they tend to cook at a slightly lower temperature, so you see there's a bit of a mismatch. So we're going to stick with egg yolks. I'll put these eggs down. The other thing I'm going to mention is, so whilst that thickens the eggs thicken the sauce, the element of fat in the dairy also has an influential factor on thickening the sauce. So one of the main things, for example, is using double cream instead of skimmed milk, and that will give you a much thicker sauce. However, to prove a point, I'm going to be using skimmed milk here, because I don't want it to be too rich, especially when you have rich puddings with whatever you're having. So the other thing that comes into play now is either a flour or starch. So usually we use corn flour, but you can use plain flour as well. And what these do, they act, well, as for any sauce, they thicken them, but they also act as a stabiliser, so it reduces the risk of the eggs curdling, which is always good for us and acts as a safeguard. So whilst it's not perhaps traditional for a custard sauce, I think it's quite nice just to have as a bit of a safeguard and to thicken your sauce for you. So corn flour, I'm just going to say something quick on corn flour and flour. I think corn flour gives a better texture. But the problem with corn flour, as with anything it thickens, it's more of an instant thing. It'll thicken it upon heating it, and once it cools it'll remain thick, but as soon as you reheat it again it loses its thickening properties. And also if you continue to boil it for a long time it'll also lose its thickening properties. Plain flour, however, I find it doesn't give quite as nice a texture in a pouring sauce anyway, but I think it's a lot more stable. So that's what I'm going to be using today in terms of the cooling down, reusing again, and it's useful for that. And we don't need to worry about it boiling so much, which is the same with corn flour as well. What I will say though is probably, because we're not using large amounts as you would for crème pâtissière, where you actually do want to boil it and cook out the flour a bit, we're using only a smaller amount, so I don't recommend boiling it, though it probably wouldn't come to much harm, just because I think it does change the taste a bit. You know how the taste between a nice sort of thick runny yolk and a cooked yolk tastes. You get that taste difference even if the texture's not so different. Okay, well I've talked quite a lot about custards now. I think it's time to get down to the practice of it, just so you know what to do. You've got a bit of a theory, by all means message me and ask me more about it, and I can guide you to other information as well. So what I'm going to start off with. In a bowl here I have about a tablespoon of plain flour and about a tablespoon of sugar. 1 to 2 tablespoons of sugar is probably about enough for the quantity we're going to be making, which is going to be about half a pint of milk, which is about just over 1/4 litre of milk. So we've got the thickening agent and the sugar there just to flavour it. And then in the saucepan I've got here just the milk, which I've infused with some vanilla. I say infused, I haven't actually put vanilla pods in, I've put vanilla extract in, because I don't tend to have lots of vanilla pods around. So anything to flavour it vanilla is fine, or any other flavour if you want. So we're just heating to blood temperature there, so I'm just going to warm it up a bit for a second. Okay, so in here I'll mix the flour and the sugar together. And actually this is a way without having to sift the flour. If you whisk it, it does exactly the same thing. I learnt this, it's quite a good tip, and you can see how that makes sure it's nice and uniformly ground. So the quantities we use now, for half a pint, as I said, of milk, we use 3 egg yolks, which is normal. So I'm just going to put these in with the flour and the sugar here. Try not to waste anything, I hate waste. Okay, let's stick that to the side, ready to wash it later. And all I'm going to do is beat it a bit. Go a bit slow just to start with so you don't get flour everywhere. And once it's all in you can go a bit. So you can see it's slightly yellow there. We want it to be a bit more lighter. We want it to look a bit more pale. A bit like when you're making a cake. So I'm really going to go at it a bit. You don't need to go too long, but just at it a bit. The other thing that's useful to do here is to make sure that your eggs are ideally at room temperature. So if you're storing them at room temperature, then that's fine. If you put them in the fridge, that's fine as well. Just make sure that you take them out. They won't need too much of a beating. I like to get my workout in whilst cooking. There we are. You can see immediately probably the transformation there, that they're getting a lot more pale there. And that's absolutely fine there. So I'll put that to the side, and now on with the milk. Okay, so what I'm doing, my hands are clean. Always cook with your hands. I don't think you should unashamedly cook with your hands. Just make sure they're clean, which I have. Put your finger in the milk and just see its blood temperature about a little bit hot. It should be hot, just not boiling. Okay, and I'm going to stick that there just so we don't make a mess everywhere. Now what we're going to do, we're going to just pour this on. Not quite all at once, but we're just going to do it in a sort of steady sort of stream. So can you see what I'm doing? That's fine there. And you just, there we are. This is what we call tempering the eggs a bit there, so preparing them for the heat they're about to receive. So just give it a good mix. I'm going to transfer now to a wooden spoon, so I'm going to stick this in a sink, which is ideally placed there for me. And with a spoon I'm just going to scrape off any bits that tend to cling to the bottom. I think because I've got a glass bowl here I can see, which is quite useful. Okay, and then we're going to go back to the saucepan. So if I can pour it in without making a mess. There we go. And sure enough I haven't got anything clinging there, so that's good. In that bowl, in a sink that goes. So now we want to put it on a low temperature. Traditionally, well not traditionally, but what some people often say, you'll see many cookbooks, is to cook it on a double saucepan, in a double saucepan. And what that means is you get a small saucepan such as this one, and you put it inside another saucepan which has been filled with water, which is just lightly boiling. And that causes more of an indirect heat and stops it from being such a harsh heat. And it is a good safeguard there, but I think it is, if you have a good saucepan, it's unnecessary really. So a good saucepan, what I define, is one that has a good thick base. So it means that the heat doesn't suddenly scorch the bottom and then not cook throughout the rest. And it also means that it does retain a bit of heat as well. And all you need to do is put it on a sort of, I say medium-low, it's not the lowest, I put it on 2 out of 6 at the moment here. Temperature, just a sort of that temperature range. And stir it and mix. And this is all we really need to do here. Do not get worried here, because you know we've got our safeguard from the flour. Know that egg yolks aren't as temperamental as egg whites in terms of cooking them out, so it's unlikely that they'll curdle there. And just know as long as you keep stirring and keep an eye on it, it'll be fine. So we're just going to keep going like that for a while, and you'll see how it will thicken later. It's already starting to thicken now, but you can, if I just show it to you here, you can still see, whoops, I'll wipe that up in a minute. It still seems very much quite liquidy. Okay, so I'm just going to continue on with stirring this and cooking it. Okay, so things are really starting to thicken with the custard now. I can show it to you. It's been just about, what has it been? It's been about 6 to 8 minutes or so. And you can see it's quite a nice thick consistency. I'll just let you know, I did actually I got a bit impatient and I turned up the temperature spot to number 3 out of my 6. I do recommend you start low though and then move up if you want to, but I have been stirring relentlessly the whole time. You don't need to do it quickly, you just need to do it that sort of movement like this to scrape everything off the bottom and distribute the heat. Whilst I just thicken it a little bit more, I'll get this bowl ready to pour it out and show you. I haven't put any water in there so you can see what will come out. Whilst I continue finishing this off, I'm just going to talk to you a bit about the processes of how the egg thickens it, or the egg yolk. So egg contains a large amount of protein, and these proteins denaturize upon heat. And there's different types of proteins that denaturize at different temperatures or different amounts of heat energy. We're getting a bit scientific here. So the way you put in a certain amount of heat energy is you either go at a higher temperature, so more heat energy is put in over a certain period of time, if you see what I mean. At a faster rate is a better way of saying it. Higher temperature, more heat energy put in at a faster rate. So if you go to lower temperature, you can wait a long time, and it will eventually thicken because these proteins will denaturize, and that will cause them to thicken the sauce. But if you're like me, as I said, I was a bit impatient, so you can turn up the temperature a bit, as long as you're stirring it to make sure that the heat goes through everywhere and is distributed throughout the whole sauce, then that's fine. It'll denaturize quicker, as long as you don't overstep the mark where it scrambles and curdles. So that's basically what happens. And there is actually, if you want to get very scientific, there's a paper, I'm trying to think what it's called, biophysics, culinary biophysics, I think, or something about. It was published in 2011. You can easily find it. And it's about something about 6 times the degrees of eggs. I can't remember. But essentially, they have a graph of egg yolks and how long to keep them at a certain temperature to get them to thicknesses of certain everyday things like Marmite and condensed milk and all that. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that now. That's sort of a custard that I would like. And I don't think it's going to get any really thicker than that without going grainy. So I'm going to turn off the heat and I'll pour it into the bowl here, and you can see what sort of thickness is achieved. Okay, I'm just going to continue to make sure. Yeah, you can see some lovely, luscious, sort of thickish custard we have. It's a bit thicker than single cream, which is what you would get if you used eggs alone, as I said. Just scraping all the insides. But it's not thick like a crème pâtissière, which uses a lot more flour. And this will keep wonderfully. If you want to let it cool and then heat it up again, that's absolutely fine. Though what I would suggest, a good little tip, if you don't want a skin forming, then get some greaseproof paper, just cut a circle or so, wet it on both sides, and then just put it on top, and that will stop you getting a skin there. If you do want it thicker than this, I'll shake it around so you can see. Just simply add more flour, or perhaps another egg yolk. And if you find this is too thick, and then you can of course take out the flour completely if you want, or just put a mere teaspoon in, which will just act as the safeguard, if you see what I mean, without having too much of a thickening property. The other option is, which I have as a safeguard here, if you think you put in too much flour and it's too thick, you could just add some more milk later. But as this is the perfect thickness for me, I don't think I shall bother putting that in. Okay, so please do have a go at making it at home. It needn't take long. I mean, 10 minutes I think process from on the saucepan, and maybe another 5 minutes for eating and weighing out. Well, there's nothing to weigh out. Tablespoon of flour, tablespoon of sugar, 3 egg yolks, and about half a pint of milk. And that's all there really is to it. So I hope you enjoy that. I hope even more so you enjoy making it and eating it. And yeah, revive the pouring custard that's traditional to Britain, that we often just buy now. And I'll see you again sometime soon with some more culinary delights. I'll decide what, any requests, I'll see if I can do something or provide any advice on something, and we can take it from there. Well, I do hope you enjoyed joining me there, and till next time, bye bye from me, Laszlo.